A seismic indictment in Georgia. The jury foreperson is sharing snippets of information that make Trump and everyone in his orbit nervous. We're going to talk about every aspect of that, including how we feel about that being as public as it is. Then internal Fox messages released in the Dominion libel case show the network's hosts internally knew Trump was lying despite continuing to spread those lies. Will Fox's viewers finally realize the contempt that the network has for them? Finally, Joe Biden visited Zelenskyy in Ukraine. It seems like a reason for all Americans to come together and applaud the president. But of course, the right couldn't even do that. We'll break down the misguided critics from conservative media. We'll discuss all of that and more. This is Majority 54.
All right, Jason. Well, I think we should start here with this special grand jury investigation of election interference by Donald Trump and his allies in Georgia. That grand jury has recommended indictments for multiple people on a range of charges in its final report. We do not have all the details yet. They remain sealed. But the forewoman of the jury has been doing the rounds, of the media rounds, and just spilling a ever so slight amount of tea on this story. It's a rather strange dynamic that I know you want to get into. And she's just kind of enjoying the spotlight and giving us just little pieces of information. Let's go to the first clip from one of these interviews that she did, and let's try to decipher what she's trying to say here.
Is it, would you say, when it comes to, there are indictments recommended, of course. Is it
Yes.
more than 12 people? Is it more than 20 people?
I think if you look at the page numbers of the report, there's about 6 pages in the middle that got cut out. Allow for spacing. It's not a short list.
Not a short list. More, I mean, when it comes to 7, is former President Trump.
Of course.
Did you recommend charges against Donald Trump?
I really don't want to share something that the judge made a conscious decision not to share. I will tell you that it was a process where we heard his name a lot. We definitely heard a lot about former President Trump, and we definitely discussed him a lot in the room. And I will say that when this list comes out, there are no major plot twists waiting for you.
You know, it's interesting. That just raises more questions.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, please do not apologize. I'm very appreciative of your time. When you say there's no plot twists and, you know, people won't be shocked, people are going to hear that and they're going to think that means that Donald Trump is definitely on that list.
Jason, what is this? What are we doing? Like, I know the audience, especially some of our new friends in the audience, may love some of this. I have to say, I don't love it. I love indicting the former president if he breaks the law, which he clearly did. I do not love this game that we're playing. How many pages is it? Like, this is not appropriate. Not appropriate.
So
I'm sorry.
Strange. And, you know, if you just listen to that clip, it sounds like what it is in part, which is a woman trying very hard to be careful with her words. But if you watch the clip, it also, that comes across. But you also see a person who is really enjoying the moment, which is fine. Like, I don't want to pile on this young woman. I think her name is Emily Kors. You know, a lot of people seem to. This happens in America, right? Like when somebody is thrust into the spotlight, people really resent that. So I'm going to skip past that part and just say that I am very concerned about. I guess I just am wondering why it is necessary for a grand jury foreperson to be interviewed by anybody.
It adds nothing to this except just
this
insights.
Is not what the people listening to this want to hear. Is this
I know
you and I? We're just a couple of like Puritan like squares.
But I have to say it because we wouldn't support a law-breaking president. But just put yourself in the shoes of, you know, an Arkansas grand jury indicting Hillary Clinton, and then the foreperson of the jury going on TV with anything resembling this kind of body language and tone. Now, once again, it's not the same. Like, Hillary's not Trump and all that, but I think there's nothing to be gained here. Let's look at one more clip here, though, and then I want you to render your judgment on all this and predict what's going on here. Let's look at a second clip from Emily Kors.
It's not a short list. I mean, we saw 75 people, and there are 6 pages of the report cut out, I think, if you look at the page numbers. So it's not...
So we're talking about more than a dozen people?
I would say that, yes.
Okay. Are these recognizable names, names that people would know?
There are certainly names that you would recognize, yes. There are names also that you might not recognize.
So, like, look, first of all, we should say
some of them have the letter Q in them.
Yeah.
It's like Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah. I want to say first, not everybody steps up to serve on a jury. I appreciate her doing her civic duty. Okay. I have a few thoughts on this, and then they go in both directions. All right. The first set of thoughts I have are just in line with what you and I have been talking about for a while in all of these investigations of Trump, which is I want to start with the disclaimer that you and I both think he should be indicted, and we both we have an outcome that we're for many crimes. Yeah. And we have an outcome that we are rooting for. And to refresh our audience's memory, this is, because it's kind of hard to keep track of all the different cases in which he's being investigated, this is the one where he called the Secretary of State of Georgia and was like, I need you to find X many votes, like
the
just
exact
go find
amount
these
to
votes.
put him like over the top,
right?
Yeah.
And so that's like criminal. All right,
yeah.
So he should be indicted for that. But I'll give you the floor before we come back to me with me then arguing back against myself. Feel free to talk about some of the things you've been concerned about the way it empowers Trump to politically use this stuff to pretend it's something it's not.
Yeah, I've previously talked about this as it relates to the New York investigation, that I think that the Attorney General in New York should have recused herself using the same standard that we used when Schumer asked, a lot of Democratic members of Congress asked Matthew Whitaker to recuse himself as it related to the Mueller investigation because he had previously commented on it. In the same way, James had previously commented on Trump and his illegal actions. She wasn't wrong about his criminality, but once you say that when you're running for office, you shouldn't oversee the investigation into that person. That was the standard we asked for with Whitaker. It's the standard Tish James should have used. It's also the standard I've asked Alvin Bragg in Manhattan, a candidate who I supported, and I was his strategist in that campaign. I've asked him personally, I asked him publicly to recuse himself there. Recusing yourself does nothing in terms of stopping the indictment from happening. In many ways, it speeds it up. It takes the politics out of it. And when you're confident that somebody has done something illegal, by recusing yourself and having trust in the prosecutors in your office, you get out of their way and you actually empower them and take some of the spin off of the ball so that they actually, when they do render their indictments, they're even more politically salient. So that's my feeling here. And it's the same kind of standard I apply here, which is she doesn't recuse herself. She's a juror, but just don't go on TV. There's nothing here to be gained. And I actually think that this district attorney, who now goes to the district attorney in Fulton County, so that district attorney has the full power here now. That district attorney has actually acquitted herself quite well. So I trust this district attorney.
And that's what I was going to say is I wonder if what is happening here is not well, first of all, we should allow for the fact that, Emily Kors is not a person who's media trained, right? She's on TV. I want to say some things in her defense. She's probably pretty nervous.
Yeah,
she's
seems pretty young. I feel bad in a way. I don't want to pile on her, but it is such a serious thing. That we have to, we can't let it go.
And Trump immediately upon her saying, that she couldn't say this or that, immediately just, did a Truth Social post that, and I'm not blaming her for this, that runs with it and says, oh, look, I've been totally exonerated. Right. So clearly he is trying to influence the district attorney. And I think, look, it may be that what we're actually seeing is her trying to influence the district attorney, because while everybody has referred to this as the grand jury in Georgia, in looking into it, it is actually a preliminary step where this special grand jury advises their opinion as to whether the district attorney should take certain charges to the real grand jury. Yeah. And so we actually have a new grand jury to go to. And so it's a very interesting process there. So I feel like a little bit of this is her trying to use the process and use the media to influence a decision that she thinks should be made. But in general, I just feel like maybe the judge should have said from the beginning, hey, nobody's allowed to go on TV and talk about this.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's a good look for the process. And then we end up with, the right having the means to try to question what will ultimately be an indictment of Trump and others.
Yeah, and Salty, you could throw that up. We have the Truth Social post here, so if people want to take a look at that who are watching on YouTube. For those of you who are listeners at home, just a reminder that we have a YouTube page now. You can go to the MeidasTouch page, find us, hit the like button. It's how we game those algorithms. But Coors also said something interesting, which is she said, quote, "It's amazing how many hours of footage you can find of that man on the phone, and that there were several recorded phone calls involving Trump that have never been publicly released. That's fascinating." So we got that going on. There's also Trump. The New York Times reported that Trump has spent $10 million from his political action committee on legal bills just last year. So this guy is raising money. A lot of Republicans are complaining that he's kind of stealing their thunder because a lot of voters aren't sophisticated enough to know which PAC they're giving to in the Republican Party. So he's raising money from these voters and then using it to defend himself against criminal investigation, which is maybe why they're not, overperforming in their midterm elections.
What I love about that article, by the way, is that it spends like the first 2 paragraphs just marveling at the fact that he paid his lawyers.
I know that is interesting. Well, obviously, if you were running a law firm, if Donald Trump or Elon Musk called me up and said, "Hey, I want you to represent me," I'd be like, well, let's pretend that I was totally sociopathic and didn't care about the ethics of it. And let's say I only cared about money. I would be like, all right, I need the entire amount up front.
Oh, for sure.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not working a minute for you. Yeah, I'm not
put it
working
in escrow.
a
I'll draw against it, man.
Right.
But I got to see it. It should be in a briefcase full of cash. We know you got those laying around. Yeah. I mean, it's just funny that it spends all that time saying it. But to the point of the point of the article, right, is that, well, now that he's a candidate, there is some question as to whether he can continue to control this political action committee to pay his legal bills. So he may not actually have a way to do that.
Well, maybe
looks like they're about to start mounting.
Yeah, I mean, he has the ability though to do like he could just start any nonprofit, for-profit, whatever, and raise the kind of money he needs to defend himself, and that will be true until the very last days.
Yes.
Like the equivalent of like Napoleon and Elba or whatever. Like wherever he goes, like he will have some people, sycophants around him till the very end, and we can count on that. Well. There are a couple of quick hits here that I think our audience will really want to just refresher on. There's just so much legal stuff happening in Trump world and within the conservative world generally. The DOJ special counsel subpoenaed Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner in the criminal investigation that the DOJ is doing. And that's special counsel. I think his name is Jack Smith. Have you noticed, Jason, that this guy looks like Beard from Ted Lasso?
Yeah.
Did you see this?
I hope he's just the same.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I want somebody a little bit more hard nosed than Beard.
Sure, but I mean, fun personality.
Same investigation that had Pence also, that subpoenaed Pence, and you also have good transition. We have this Fox Dominion case. Let's talk about this because we had a long weekend. I think a lot of people skipped this in sort of podcasting world. But this is a $1.6 billion lawsuit from Dominion Voting Systems against Fox News. I think our audience is generally familiar with the background of that case. It's been winding its way through the courts. Dominion filed a motion for summary judgment. You as the former trial lawyer could probably talk through at least the significance of that. And Jason, we've got some discovery, some fascinating discovery here that they quoted in their filing for summary judgment. Where should we start here?
Well, summary judgment, first of all, is really hard to get when you're the person suing. And so the fact that they are going after it so thoroughly means they think they might actually have a chance to get it. The reason it's hard to get is because summary judgment is literally you just saying to the judge, hey, there's really no major facts left in dispute, and you should just rule for us. There's no reason for this to go to a jury because there's none of the major facts really can be disputed. And then what you do is you take all the depositions and that kind of thing that have already been done, all the stuff where people talked under oath and all the evidence you have, and you just submit it. You give it all to the judge and you basically say, this is what we're going to do at trial. As you can see, there's no reason to go to trial. Now, it's really, really hard to win one of these motions, and I kind of doubt that they will. It's hard when you're the plaintiff, the one suing. But it does tell you exactly what they're going to bring at trial. And boy, it is like some pretty scandalous and damaging stuff for Fox News.
Yeah, I almost don't know where to start, but let's just get to the heart of the matter. The high level takeaway from this is that Fox News personalities are saying one thing privately, which resembles what a lot of us would say, which is Sidney Powell's a complete nut, which is something Carlson said. Sean Hannity, in his deposition, said, quote, the whole narrative that Sidney was pushing, I did not believe it for 1 second. Sidney Powell is the attorney for Trump who is spreading these allegations. Publicly, on the air, they were highly suggestive, if not explicitly saying the very same things that Trump was saying. They were pushing the election conspiracy narratives. And Jason, I think what's fascinating about all this is that their rationale for why they were spreading election denialism on the air, I found really fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, we all sit around thinking that we just got to help the right wing.
Right.
Now, that's some of it. Some of it. That comes a little later. But it's really like, we're just worried about the corporate brand. Like, not enough people are watching. It's like what happened is like if Fox News were like, a television series and one of the big stars demanded a lot of money in their contract for their next season, and they didn't get it, so they had to like kill off the character, and then they realized, oh wait, people were watching this show for this character, we have to pay them the money and bring the character back. And that's what they did. Like, they realized, oh wait a second, in the wake of this election turning out the way it did, people aren't really watching Fox News because they don't like the news. Conservatives are like, hey, wait a second, we don't like seeing our side lose, so they're not watching. So they just like change the plot. They're like, ooh, maybe we didn't lose. You better stay tuned. It's crazy.
Well, let me just point our listeners in the direction of this text that Carlson sent out that Salty just put up on the screen, which is they're worried about Newsmax. That's who they're worried about.
That's so embarrassing, by the way.
Yeah, and they're not just worried about Newsmax. And taking their audience, that's what they're worried about. But there was this back and forth on November 12th. This is nearly a week after Joe Biden clinched the presidency. And there's this back and forth going on because Trump tweeted that, you must see Hannity takedown of the horrible, inaccurate, and anything but secure Dominion voting system, which is used yada, yada, yada. So basically spreading lies. He also, Trump shouts out Hannity, then he shouts out Lou Dobbs, who Fox's own executives in these internal communications apparently compared to North Korean state television, their own personality, which is, by the way, funny. And like, I wish, like, this is like a kind of thing I wish we said, but but I just don't know how these people will get. I'm curious as to what their ethical worldview is. These are people who claim to be Christians. I'm like, what reading of the Bible do you have that allows you to do this kind of stuff?
They're actors. You and I have talked about this before. They're actors. And here's what I mean. Like, even put this stuff aside. Whenever I watch, like if you flip on like Fox and Friends, okay, the thing that you hear constantly is real America. In the heartland, people feel this way. In real America, as if these people are leaving the studio and just going and sitting down in a diner and eating hash browns, right? And next to truckers. That's not what's happening. Like, they're actors, man. Like, these people live in Manhattan, in New York City. They live on the Upper West Side.
And Tucker Carlson lives in Maine.
Right. Like they're actors. They eat at the same fancy restaurants as all the people at MSNBC and CNN. They travel on the subway to go places. And when they finish a report where they talk about real America, they don't go to a diner. First of all, they spend about 30 minutes taking off their makeup, like everybody else who's on television. And then they don't encounter other conservatives. They're in New York City in the heart of it. Like, that's the life they've chosen to live.
Yeah, if they're encountering them, they're encountering this sort of country club conservatives.
Oh, for sure. And I say that as a person who lives in what they classify as real America, right? Like that they don't know that Kansas City is in Missouri. They think it's in Kansas. Like,
they're not like me, Jason. They're not out in Encinitas surfing. Okay?
That's right.
They're not like a real American like me.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, there's this interesting.
By the way, is that a shower behind you? What is that?
Yeah, I'm in this Airbnb. Like, I think I've slowly downgraded my Airbnbs throughout this trip. It's like the opposite of actually like how I think I recommended this once when we did a travel pod where I was like, you start with the less fancy place and then you work your way up to the fancy one. I am now in the back of somebody's house in Encinitas right now because I wanted to extend my trip. But the waves are like 30 feet, which we'll get to at the end of this podcast where we now do this type of banter. But there's this woman, I want to shout out Fox News correspondent Jackie Heinrich, who saw Trump's claims and was fact-checking him on the air. And her fact-checking, Jason, seemed to set people off internally. The very same people who were complaining about Trump himself privately are now complaining about her fact-checking Trump.
Oh yeah. They're like, get her fired immediately. It is, by the way, exactly what you think it is. When I was, running for office, my campaign manager, Abe, and I had this saying that we would say back and forth to each other occasionally, which is, this is what they think we're doing. So like anytime we were doing something that like the conservative, like political operatives would have thought we were doing. So like if we went to like a show, we went to a theater to be with like some donors or something, some liberal seeming thing that they thought, or like we would go to an event that it was like all LGBT folks, right? Like Abe would turn to me and joke. He'd be like, well, now today we're doing what they think we're doing. Right. So like, this was them doing what we think they're doing. This was a text thread that was Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham just like running the right-wing conspiracy and being like, oh, she should be fired immediately. How dare she do her job and report the actual news without clearing it with us, the opinion people who are in primetime at Fox.
It's crazy
what we think they're doing.
And Carlson told Hannity, please get her fired, talking about all this, and says it needs to stop immediately. Like tonight, it's measurably hurting the company. The stock price is down. Not a joke. Once again, the stock price is down.
What we think they're talking about. And also, like, if you were to write a script, like a drama about really, really terrible corporate people who don't care about what happens to anything outside of their stock price, they would say lines that were that cliche, and then you would pitch it and people would be like, I'm sorry, can you please write this in a way that is a little more believable and a little less cliche, because this is a little too on the nose. But no, they are that on the nose. He's like, our stock price is plummeting. We have to stop reporting the actual news.
It's crazy.
It's amazing.
It's crazy. And of course they took the tweet down. That's the end of that story. So let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsor. When we come back, we're going to dive into the legalities of this, where I think things get really fascinating. Like, will Fox lose this case or not? There's like a huge tension going on at the heart of this case. Then we're going to talk about Biden's trip to Ukraine, and then we'll end with One for Us, which I think is a new segment for us. We'll be right back. So I often get asked, what's my favorite supplement? And this is an easy answer: Athletic Greens. I've been taking this long before they sponsored this podcast, and it's really your one-stop shop. They call themselves nutritional insurance, and it's really so much more than that. It's the first thing I do every morning. I've now started taking it instead of drinking coffee first thing in the morning, and I originally gave it a try because I was feeling low in energy, and I wanted to get an extra boost, an extra pep in my step for, certain things that require the most out of me. Things like doing this podcast, doing fitness, playing sports, just being at my best for my team during my day job. And you could take it at any time of the day. I know people who take it, in the middle of the day instead of that afternoon coffee. I know people who take it right before they go to sleep. And with one delicious scoop a day, you get 75 high quality vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients. So if you're looking for simpler, cost-effective supplement routine, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/majority. That's athleticgreens.com/majority to check it out.
So we're about to get back into this case and some other news in a second, but I wanted to pivot back to what is really the main mission of this podcast, which is to talk about all of this news in a way where we help you talk about it with your friends, right? And with people in your life, because that's the whole mission of Majority 54, is to take the 54% of Americans who typically vote in a progressive way in elections, treat it like the majority that it is, and then help you work to expand that majority in your actual social interactions in everyday life, because that's the most effective argument that any of us can make, is working with the people in our lives to make these cases. And so I think that this stuff about Dominion is really important. The Dominion case is really important because what it means is it means that every time somebody tells you, oh, well, the media is liberal, or, oh, you know, I listen to Fox News and that's where I actually get the real information. You're not getting the real stuff from wherever you get your information. I think it is important not to pivot back just to how incredibly, how much these people were lying and saying one thing and doing another. Like, that's important, but it's not as important as the motive. The motive is what's important here, right? The motive is all of this talk that they had about, the corporate bottom line. The point being that, you can't really convince somebody who spends an hour every night with Tucker Carlson and feels like they're in their living room. You can't convince them that guy is telling you things that aren't true, period. You have to have a motive, right? And Americans are way more likely to indict their sources of information, no pun intended, if you impeach the credibility, right? And that credibility has to do with profit margin. So if you just say, look, Fox News is a bunch of Republicans and they want you to believe a bunch of Republican things, somebody's gonna be like, okay, well, I'm a Republican and I do believe Republican things. But if you say, look, Fox News has a financial incentive to do this, and you can show them, like, they endangered the Republic by propagating information that they knew was untrue because they didn't think there would be an actual consequence. They didn't really think that something like January 6th would happen, right? So they were willing to play with fire, and they were willing to do that because over on other networks and over on Facebook and other places where people might get their news, Newsmax, Facebook, that kind of thing, they were doing that. And Fox was like, this is hurting our stock price, so let's go tell people what they want to hear, not what the truth is. And that's how you impeach the credibility of these sources, is you say, look, they're just trying to get money. Because that is something that across the board, Americans understand, the idea of corporate greed and, people doing evil things because of greed, because the 80s and 90s were full of movies about that. And so I think it's how you get into that.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is and I know that you don't spend your time doing this, but if you listen to their right-wing competitors, one thing they do is they talk about that profit motive. They talk about the mainstream media, and they lump Fox in with the mainstream media. So actually from the right flank, there's this weird populist, anti-corporate message coming from some of these fringe right sources. So their audience is being primed with that message.
Here's what's so scary about all that is that the media environment is starting to mirror the electoral environment. Because what's happening in, say, like the budding Republican primary for president right now, people are cutting into the bone because there's no meat left when it comes to saying crazy things. I mean, Trump just said the other day, he's got to top himself all the time, right? He just said the other day how he was like going to arrest homeless people, and he was going, all sorts of, and not long ago he said he was going to do the Duarte Philippines thing where he would execute drug dealers. Why is he having to do that? Because he has to constantly top himself. Yeah. Well, that's really dangerous for our republic from politicians. But when you have a profit motive for the media environment to do the same thing and have to keep topping one another and saying crazier and crazier stuff, well, now the monster is out of control at some point.
Right. Well, so that's the court of public opinion. Let's go back to the actual court. And this is a $1.6 billion ask from Dominion. Now, that's the first thing I just want to, I don't want to say pour cold water on this, but maybe some cool water, maybe like room temperature water on this, to say $1.6 billion is a lot to ask from a company that's valued, I think, at something like $100 million. It may be a little bit more than that, but that's a lot. So that's the one thing. Will they get $1.6 billion? A lot of people that I've been reading say that that's going to be a tough ask. Now, what they're saying is they could have grown to a company that size. Now, I'm not an expert on the market share, so that's one thing. Two is the standard here is actually really difficult for them to meet. Everything we just said aside, the standard here is actual malice, which says that only statements about public figures that are knowingly false or show a reckless disregard for the truth are actionable. This goes back to a 1964 case called New York Times versus Sullivan. So it's a tough standard, but not an impossible standard. And so once again, knowingly false, which it sounds like, based on these internal messages, Dominion has a good case. Reckless disregard for the truth, one could also argue that.
Yeah,
I would be one of those.
I actually think it's a pretty solid case. Right? And I think that these texts are, I didn't feel it was a great case before this, but clearly there's a reason that they've brought this suit. Like, they have some pretty solid evidence of reckless disregard for the truth. And what it appears the Fox folks are doing is they're falling back on this argument that, well, look, I mean, these people came on our air and they said this, but we, in many cases, we didn't say this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so then you have them trying to do two things, right? And this is where it gets hard to prove, I guess. But you have the people at Fox like Hannity and Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson. On the one hand, they've defended themselves in libel cases by saying, well, look, we are not journalists. We are opinion pundits, right? If you want to come, like the news, they literally make the argument, and it's true, that the news stops at about 7 p.m. Eastern on Fox, right? Like whatever semblance of news they have, because that's when they just start telling you their opinion. Well, okay, you make that argument on the one hand, but then on the other hand, here, you're going to make the argument, well, I'm just doing the journalism thing where I ask questions. I'm not responsible for what these people say. I'm not required to state my opinion because I'm just being a journalist. And it's like, well, you got to pick. You're either an opinion pundit or you're a journalist. You can't be both at the same time.
Yeah, this is what makes this tricky is we're pretty, like, U.S. is unique in how stringent we are when it comes to First Amendment protections. And New York Times versus Sullivan, this is a quote from that case, says, debate on public issues should be unlimited, robust, and wide open, and such debate may well include vehement, caustic, and sometimes unpleasant, sharp attacks on government and public officials. And essentially what the U.S. standard is, if I were to summarize it, is we want to protect your ability to be wrong if you're being wrong in good faith. That's basically when you're talking about public officials in the government. Now, it's a little bit different if I'm just talking about a private individual, but it's a lower standard. I think that's generally right. I do think they should clear this based on what we've seen. Now, what Fox is saying is, well, just because we have somebody on, they say something, that doesn't mean we're saying it. Now, I do think they have explicitly said enough, but even if they didn't, your choice to continually have somebody on and not fact check them, to me, should fall well within the standard.
Well, and isn't the irony here that, Trump and several right-wing politicians have been trying to roll back this standard so that they can bring these suits?
Trump explicitly has said that he wants to weaken First Amendment protections along these lines for obvious reasons, because, he
loves to sue people who say bad things about him, and he's
exactly
a bit of a soft-skinned individual.
Yeah, and then Thomas and Gorsuch have both said that they want to weaken the sort of protections of Times versus Sullivan. And so, I could spend a lot of time on this, but at no point should we ever expect the right wing to be coherent and consistent on anything. So, it's that.
But Ravi, they're being hypocritical. This is the smoking gun. They said one thing into another.
So much time on this. I think in general it's a good standard. I think it's a good standard.
Yeah.
I like the fact that we have the standard. I think Dominion will clear it based on what we've seen. Now, obviously, we don't have access to everything, but based on what I'm seeing,
look, here's what I think is going to happen. Fox News is going to settle out of court. They're going to settle out of court for a lot of money.
They don't want to be in court could you imagine what these because these are just the depositions and discovery. Could you imagine what this would look like if Hannity had to take the stand?
Not only that, dude, every single time that one of these major networks is in the news, it's wall-to-wall coverage on the other network, right? So if CNN or MSNBC are in the news for something, well, Fox News, it's all they talk about, right? And then MSNBC and CNN don't do it as much to each other, but they do it a little bit. Like when Cuomo was in trouble, MSNBC talked about it, right? And so because they're all competitors, right? Like if Coke could put, hey, there was a scandal at Pepsi on their can, they would, right? That's what's happening here. And they don't want that. Fox
they're going to take fire from both sides, Jason. They're going to have Newsmax is also going to be covering this. It'd be like, you see, they don't think the election was stolen.
Yeah, exactly. They'll be like, they're a Rhino network. And then you'll have, over at MSNBC, you'll have something completely different. And then over at CNN, you'll have Brian Stelter on there every day showing everything from these depositions. And they do not want that. It would be, as they mentioned several times in these texts, very bad for their brand image, and it would hurt their stock price. And so that's why this ain't going to trial. Right. They will settle this out of court. And I don't think Dominion's going to get $1 billion, but I think it might keep Dominion in business.
Right. Yeah. If you've seen, I'm sure you've seen a civil action. For our audience, there's the key moment is when the bad guys, in that case, it was a chemicals company, or no, it was an insurance company. And in this case, it's oh no, that was a chemical company. In this case,
Yeah.
it's a Fox News. They say they try to dismiss the case early, and if that motion to dismiss fails, as it did here, then it's settlement time, and that's basically where we've been. You know, at this point, Dominion is aggressive. They're like, let's just rule now in our favor.
Well, that's why I think Dominion put together this summary judgment motion, right? Because the summary judgment motion is like, well, let's just lay out in the court of public opinion everything, so you can get a little taste of what this is going to be like for you, Fox News.
Fascinating. All right, well, let's talk about Ukraine. Biden. Wow, Biden flying to Ukraine or heading out to Europe, getting to Ukraine, and walking Kiev.
Getting on a train and then walking Kiev. Yeah.
Amazing. And then he gave a speech from Poland. Let's hear what he had to say.
1 year ago, the world was bracing for the fall of Kyiv. Well, I've just come from a visit to Kyiv, and I can report Kyiv stands strong. Kyiv stands proud. It stands tall. And most important, it stands free. When Russia invaded, it wasn't just Ukraine being tested. The whole world faced a test for the ages. Europe was being tested. America was being tested. NATO was being tested. All democracies are being tested. And the questions we faced were as simple as they were profound. Would we respond? Or would we look the other way? Would we be strong? Or would we be weak?
I don't know about you, man. Like, one of the most depressing things, and there's like a few depressing things I say in understatement in American politics in the last few years. I think one of the most has got to be that we are now so divided, that the two parties are increasingly divided over whether to defend a democracy against Russia, right? Like whether to support a democracy that is defending itself. And like, when I see something like that, that should be a speech that, no matter, like, even if Biden was a Republican and gave that speech, that should be the kind of speech that would make me feel the way I felt right after 9/11 when, and I have a lot of issues and came to have a lot of issues with what Bush did even 2 weeks after 9/11. But when he gave the speech standing on the pile of rubble, for instance,
Yeah, they'll all hear from us now. Yeah.
They'll all hear from us now. Like, nobody felt a party affiliation in that moment. And
yeah, his approval rating was like 100%.
It was like 110%. It was like something that didn't make mathematical sense. And it's really, it's just depressing that people can't look at a speech like that and just be proud of their country and of their president, regardless of what party. That really bothers me.
The counterfactual, if Trump had won re-election, is stark in moments like this. I mean, there's so many of them.
It's like,
could you imagine?
Well, there would be no war in Ukraine. Right. Russia would just be enslaving, and they would just have Ukraine completely under its thumb. He was gonna pull us out of NATO, man. I mean, he was gonna completely undermine NATO. We don't even know that Russia would have stopped at Ukraine at that point.
Right.
So,
well, he basically, there's a little bit of pep in Biden's step these days. He kind of took it to Putin in this speech as well. Let's go to this clip.
1 year into this war, Putin no longer doubts the strength of our coalition, but he still doubts our conviction. He doubts our staying power. He doubts our continued support for Ukraine. He doubts whether NATO can remain unified. But there should be no doubt. Our support for Ukraine will not waver. NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire. President Putin's craven lust for land and power will fail, and the Ukrainian people's love for their country will prevail. Democracies of the world will stand guard over freedom today, tomorrow, and forever.
There's not a lot of stuff that makes me think, like, in any way feel wistful at all for the days when I kind of wanted to be president of the United States. But the idea, I mean, you talk about there being pep in his step. I mean, the idea of getting to go to Warsaw, Poland, and give a speech where you directly address a villain like Vladimir
Amazing.
Putin and say you're going to stand for democracy and this coalition is standing together. That's like the kind of historical moment that like I would really think it would put pep in his step, because that's where you go like, oh, I'm not just part of it, I'm making history right now. And you feel valuable, and you feel invaluable because you are at that moment.
And I don't know what's going on in that square, but the advance and the look of it all, for those of you who are just listening on the audio, it is gorgeous scenery.
Yeah.
Like, what an image. Like, absolutely breathtaking scene. So he then came home, and then it was the 1 year anniversary. So he's pounding this drum. So he made it, he gave even more insight here into what he's thinking on the 1 year anniversary just yesterday. Let's go to this speech.
When President Putin ordered his tanks to roll into Ukraine, he thought we would roll over. He was wrong. The Ukrainian people are too brave. America, Europe, a coalition of nations from the Atlantic to the Pacific, we were too unified. Democracy was too strong.
Yeah, and then he doubled down on support for NATO. Reminder that Trump attacked NATO, basically. One of the many, many norms that he disregarded was our commitment to NATO. And this is like where the counterfactual is really powerful.
And what I think is so important about this moment is that it could be looked at just as, it's the 1 year anniversary. So he's talking about it. We're going to hear from Ben Shapiro in a moment, who's going to give us a completely different take. People don't turn it off.
Don't leave.
You're not going to hear from him. He's not like a guest. Like, we're going to come back and talk about what he said. But the reason, sadly, that it is so important, and why this moment in American politics makes me feel kind of down about the fact that we don't have unity on this, is that Biden is having to do this because he's having to campaign for the idea of continuing to support Ukraine. He has to solidify the support of Ukraine among the American people so that the Republicans in Congress don't pull the rug out from under Ukraine, because that's what so many of them want to do. And it drives me crazy that we have to do that. But that's why Biden has to take this moment, and he has to make these statements, because he has to remind people why this is so important.
Got it. Yeah, well, let's talk about this. Well, I'll mention briefly that Putin announced he's suspending participation in the START treaty. I think that this is not that significant, because you're basically counting on before this anyway, is essentially Putin's word anyway. So I'm not sure much change there. And he was careful to say suspending. So they didn't.
Well, I think what is significant about it, though, is that he's basically saying we're not going to make any attempt to let inspectors back in. On the one hand, they're like, hey, we're not gonna actually do any more nuclear weapons, but we're also not going to let you check to see if we're not doing any more nuclear weapons. Which,
one reading of it is hopeful, though.
But
he could be starting to lay the groundwork for things he can concede down the line.
Yeah,
in the
that's
event
true.
Of a
that could be
truce. Now that could just be wishful thinking. Now, okay, let's round this out with hearing from our newly bearded friend Ben Shapiro on this issue. Jason, I want both your opinion on his new look.
I don't know that I'm knowledgeable enough of his old look to make the
his
comparison.
new look, which he's growing out his facial hair, and two, I want your opinion on the substance of what he has to say. Let's go to this clip.
Okay.
And the thing that people forget about Joe Biden's approval rating is that what made it go down in the first place was his weakness in Afghanistan. If you look at the history of Joe Biden's job approval rating, his job approval rating was at about 50%, 51% for a long period of time to begin his presidency. And then it really dipped and went negative right around the time that he decided that he was going to ignominiously pull out of Afghanistan with no plan whatsoever, hand the country over to 8th century Islamic barbarians, and then allow a bunch of American soldiers to get killed and a bunch of Afghan translators to get stuck behind, a bunch of Americans to get stuck behind. So foreign policy weakness does have dramatic ramifications for Joe Biden, and he must know this. So right now, Joe Biden's approval rating is stuck in the 43, 44% range, according to Real Clear Politics. Now, that has been a slight increase from its real absolute low of about 37%, which was back in July of 2022. But he's been kind of trending about even since September. And so he has to do something to reset, because now we are starting to look at his re-elect campaign. His re-elect campaign is going to be launched any day now. We are growing closer. It's near the end of February. We're going to start seeing his reelect campaign pump into full gear starting March, April, May. And so he has to do something to reset. So the way he decided that he was going to reset is by heading over to Ukraine over the weekend. It was a secret Ukraine trip, and it was promoted by all the usual media sources as a groundbreaking, unbelievably brave thing for the president of the United States to do. Never mind the fact that we've had a multiplicity of American senators and congresspeople who have already gone over to Ukraine. Never mind the fact that Boris Johnson went over to Ukraine when he was prime minister of the UK. Never mind the fact that you've had pretty much every Western leader except for Joe Biden go over to Ukraine over the course of the past year since the war began in Ukraine. Joe Biden finally went over to Ukraine, and the media reacted with their usual combination of sycophantic drooling and massaging his unmentionables. It was, exactly what Joe Biden had bargained for. Now, is it going to have any real impact on Joe Biden's presidency? My guess is absolutely not, because nothing actually changed except for Joe Biden posturing.
All right. Let me go ahead and take these in reverse order. First of all, his argument that this wasn't actually brave because a lot of other people have done it. Fine. I don't really care. Like, yeah, he's president of the United States. He went to a war zone. Is it like immeasurably brave? No. Like I think he was pretty safe. Okay. Like, I'll concede that point. I don't think it's a big part of what they were trying to do. I don't think they were trying to act like Joe Biden was like, had a K-bar knife in his teeth and he was running under fire in the Donbass. That's not what they were trying to claim. Now, by the way, that's what Ben Shapiro does in his books, in the character that he's written that resembles himself. But that's not what Joe Biden was trying to do. And I will just say, as a guy who's been to Afghanistan, no, I'm not overwhelmed by the bravery of Joe Biden for going to Ukraine, but Joe Biden didn't try to overwhelm me for that bravery. So I don't even know why Ben Shapiro is talking about that. The next part, going reverse order, that this is about re-election campaign and it's just political. No, this is about the fact that all these assholes on the right don't want to fund the resistance in Ukraine anymore, and they want Russia to win, and he has to fight a battle politically here. He has to campaign for the idea of supporting a democracy that's trying to be where a dictatorship is trying to take it over, one that has historically been one of our greatest allies over the last 80 years. That would be why he's having to do this, Ben, because people on your side are trying to keep him from being able to support Ukraine. The stuff he said about Afghanistan, look, I've had my disagreements with some of the policies that Biden has had on Afghanistan, but the idea of portraying it as if we wouldn't have been turning the place over to the Taliban if not for Biden is ridiculous, given that literally Trump wanted to turn it over 4 months earlier. Trump's the one who released a bunch of Taliban folks from prison in a deal that he made with the Taliban, which made it an awful lot harder to hold off the Taliban. But I think what bothers me most of all about what he said about Afghanistan is how incredibly obviously disingenuous he is, as evidenced by the fact that he just offhandedly says that a bunch of American soldiers were killed. No, Ben, 12 U.S. Marines and 1 American soldier were killed. So fuck you, asshole, for just talking about them like they're just a group of people who you don't care about and you're using as political pawns. Now, your question was about whether his beard is pretty good. Yeah, actually, as a guy who's got a little bit of gray in his beard and doesn't grow it out as much anymore, I'm kind of impressed that he doesn't have any gray in his beard. But at the end of the day, Ben Shapiro is a guy who, good beard or not good beard, he's just a dude who could have been the first Jewish president if he could learn to talk through his throat instead of his nose.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot. I don't know if I have much to add to that. So I would say there's also the sense that, okay, Biden should be penalized for what Ben Shapiro views as a major foreign policy mistake, but he shouldn't be able to take credit for foreign policy successes. Right. It just doesn't make sense to me. So he also made claims earlier in this clip about how, the air raid sirens were happening because Biden was there. So somehow, and he basically implied that he was putting the Ukrainians in danger. So you may notice a contradiction here. He's saying that Biden is going to this war zone. He's totally safe, but he's insensitive because he's putting Ukrainians in danger because now the Russians, are threatening and there's it just doesn't make any sense.
It's fascinating to me how they just truly believe that Zelenskyy is a guy who will just do the bidding of American politicians.
Right.
I mean, at one point they thought, oh, well, he'll just go ahead and he'll investigate or announce he's investigating Biden in order to get the weapons that he needs. That was what Trump tried to get him to do. And now they think, well, clearly he would just do whatever Biden says and sound air raid sirens unnecessarily, which it's kind of a big deal in a war zone when you sound air raid sirens. So,
and given this is for people, this podcast, who have people in your lives that you're trying to persuade, and Ben Shapiro's show, unfortunately, is one of the most listened to on the right out there. there's one simple trick. You don't have to know everything Ben Shapiro is talking about at any given point and fact check him in real time. The simple question you should often ask anybody who's playing you a clip or sharing a clip on the internet, your uncle or whatever on Ben Shapiro, is ask the question, is this the standard you'd be bringing to a conservative? Of course not. If Trump went to Ukraine and was taking credit for a successful foreign policy move like Biden, full-throatedly supporting Ukraine and NATO, Shapiro would not be bringing this level of scrutiny. That's the question I would just be asking to anybody. Be like, hey, do you think he'd be bringing this kind of energy if it were Trump? No. The answer is no, of course.
Yeah, you just introduce a scenario where you just reverse it.
Right.
Or like actually something that Meidas did on Instagram last week is take a thing that actually happened and just put it in a different country and change the facts and pretend it's about Hillary Clinton and see how they react and be like, no, that's the same situation. Characters, and now you're outraged.
Amazing.
So I think it's actually quite effective. All right, well, let's end on an up note, actually having to do with Republicans. I want to share with people a little bit about Governor Spencer Cox from Utah and something that he said this week. People who have been listening to this show for a while will know that Spencer Cox is a friend of mine and has been on the show before. He is the Republican governor of Utah. And, it feels oftentimes like there are no Republican politicians who will speak out for team democracy or team not make everything terrible. But sometimes Spencer Cox actually does that, and he does that at political risk. And look, I disagree with Spencer and he disagrees with me on all sorts of stuff, but it's nice to know that there are a few people out there on the other side of the aisle, elected officials, that is, who are, pretty decent and trying to do the right thing. So he had a tweet thread this week in response to Marjorie Taylor Greene calling for basically civil war, saying we need a national divorce. She was really calling for secession of red states. And he quote tweeted her and said, "This rhetoric is destructive and wrong and honestly evil. We don't need a divorce. We need marriage counseling, and we need elected leaders that don't profit by tearing us apart. We can disagree without hate. Healthy conflict was critical to our nation's founding and survival." He went on to do things like, well, first he quoted Reagan talking about the shining city on a hill, which I noticed on Twitter did still upset some Democrats, but like, the quote was the idea that we don't come to these monuments as people who are white or black or anything else. We come to them as Americans. He was trying to unify. But then his last two tweets, I think, were really worth remarking on, which is they show pictures of him with Kamala Harris. Now, this is a Republican governor in a Republican state who presumably would like to be reelected, showing pictures of himself with Biden, with Kamala Harris, talking about American exceptionalism, talking about the idea of working closely with people who you disagree with, and that being what makes America special, and that he's eager to work with the Biden administration, despite healthy conflict that he has with them, to actually reach understanding and get things done. So, look, I'm not saying, so look, everything's okay. What I am saying is, there are still some people out there who can give us hope for the idea that this whole American experiment is worth continuing. And I want us to remember that.
Wow. Well, that was well said. Well, I've been getting a lot of comments, Jason, from our audience saying, where is the banter? So longtime Majority 54 listeners, we're going to keep it. We're just going to do it at the end from now on, because our friends over at Meidas, they know everything about YouTube. So when we start with my surfing stories, there's like a
people are like, I'm trying to watch a political show. What is
somehow
going on
the YouTube audience isn't interested. So what's going on? Give me the update. We haven't really checked in properly in a while with all this hiatus and everything.
Let's see. So exciting stuff. There's 39 days until like True's first baseball game, and then my first one is pretty soon after that. It's been kind of baseball-ish weather here lately, which is pretty awesome. So
what's baseball weather? Because isn't it like really cold everywhere right now?
The last 2 days it's been in the 50s and 60s here.
Oh wow.
And like I saw this tweet the other day that said, I tell myself I don't believe in seasonal depression, and then the sun comes out and I feel like I took a party drug. And it's like, and that's me for sure. I actually have this huge light, like enormously bright light that the VA recently gave me. So shout out to the VA that they gave me, that is for like, seasonal affected mental health stuff. And Diana is like, other than PTSD therapy, this is the best thing the VA has ever done for us. Like,
Wow.
whether it's me, her, True, whoever gets up first, goes downstairs and flips on that light. And I walk out of my bedroom toward, I mean, you know how my house is laid out. I walk out of my bedroom toward the living room and the kitchen. And it's like the sun is not just out, it's like it's in my living room.
Oh, it's amazing.
And it's a great way to start the day.
Oh, incredible.
What about you?
Yeah.
I mean, you're surfing. I mean,
Well, I'm
you're
heading back to
having
New
no
York.
seasonal effect at anything.
I think I reached the point where I've gotten disoriented at not being home. I think even I reached my limit. I think most people, I get a lot of messages like, how do you like just go to a different place every week? And for me, it's usually the winter because I try to chase the sun. That's my version of what you're talking about.
Yeah, you're like
until I have children.
Rare, youthful snowbird.
Yeah, until I have children, I'm going to do that. But so I'm heading back to New York. I'm in Encinitas, great town. Shout out to all the people from Encinitas who are listening. Great town north of San Diego. I've been surfing in the ocean with a wetsuit. But my 40th birthday is coming up. And so I'm like racing to 40, like as you would expect, with like a series of just totally irrationally high goals of things I want to do. So like I've booked Kelly Slater's wave pool. He's got this wave pool that's like that a train creates a wave. I did it last year, but I like booked it. I'm doing it with some friends. I'm doing a 40th birthday party in Costa Rica with friends. I'm trying to finish my novel by the time my 40th birthday is happening, which is why I haven't been a great writing partner to you on the thing you're working on with your cousin. Secret
That's
project.
quite okay.
But I'm trying to get this thing. I'm basically doing all the things. I've signed up for 2 fitness competitions. I'm like a caricature of somebody hitting 40 right now. If one day I'm going to pull up in a red Corvette in your house.
I was going to say, if you didn't live in New York City, you would get a red Corvette.
Yeah.
MMA.
Yeah. So
Well,
those are the things that are left on
I
my
hate
list.
that we're going to miss out on your 40th birthday party on account of the 2 kids.
I figured, but thinking for me is it's worth asking. You know, I view it as like a destination wedding. Like
you stop asking, I'm going to be like, okay, Ravi officially knows I'm not cool.
Yeah. But you could come to the wave pool, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Surf the wave pool. But yeah, so I'm ready to go home. It's a rarity, but I'm ready to go home.
All right.
I'm ready to go back to New York. So
all right. All right. Well, this was good. All right. Remember to subscribe to Majority 54 wherever you listen to audio podcasts. Just search Majority 54. Please leave us a 5-star review. I appreciate everybody. We appreciate everybody who has let us know recently what they think of the slightly changed format and of the sort of reboot, the things we've been doing. But, whether you like it, whether you don't, let us know. Go to the audio podcast comments and let us know what you think. Thank you to everybody in the Midas Mighty. And as always, remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.